So we will be discussing two different styles of teaching, capturing and luring. Capturing is where you set up a scenario where the behavior is likely to occur naturally, and luring is where you use a resource the dog wants in order to guide them through or into the behavior. And we're going to be using these two different styles of teaching for our dogs to learn two real-world skills. For capturing, we're going to teach our dogs look at me. Look at me is useful for engagement, for healing, for an interrupter cue, head orientation, or leave it. And touch is useful for recall training, asking a dog to hold still, maneuvering a dog into a car or crate, or a drop it cue. So again, let's go ahead and transition from theory into hands-on. You need to ask yourself for capturing, when do I see this behavior occur naturally? I'll give you an example from our lives. I was trying to teach our dog Briggs the speak cue where he would bark. However, before he came to us, he wore a bark collar, so he did not offer this behavior naturally, except when someone would knock on the door. Then he would bark. That was the only context where I saw the behavior I wanted occur naturally. So I set up a training scenario in which we would knock at the door, he would bark, and I would capture the behavior. So I want you to go ahead and think to yourself, when would I see a look at me occur naturally with my dogs? Well, with my own dogs, we see it with the stalk game. If you're unfamiliar with what the stalk game is, this is where you might be out in the yard with your dogs, you have toys out, you're playing, maybe they have a toy in their mouth, and all of a sudden you look at them, put your hands up, and start moving towards them slowly. You're stalking them. They'll freeze, they'll look right at you, make eye contact with you, and then run off with the toy or do a play bow or something like that. If that sounds familiar to you, then teaching your dog look at me using the stalk game is a really great opportunity to use capturing. So the steps to capturing eye contact are going to be set up a scenario. Go ahead and set up where you would typically see the behavior occur naturally. Wait patiently. As soon as you see the behavior you want, mark that behavior and go ahead and follow up with a reward. And you're going to repeat this process until the dog is quickly reoffering the desired behavior. There are pitfalls in every training style. The pitfall of capturing is that you need to generalize the behavior. Whenever we talk about generalization, we talk about three different aspects: location, context, and person. The location is often the strongest clue to your dog on what you want them to do. If you were playing the stalk game in the yard and that's where you've always played it with them, then they're going to think that that cue is just for the yard. So as soon as you bring them in the house, you need to do a mini reteach. The context might also become important. So let's say you were playing this game with them in the yard when they had a toy in their mouth. Well, that toy is part of the context clues for them on what to do. So you need to phase that out slowly. And finally, the person might also be an important part of the context for them. So if you would like other people to use this cue, then you need to have them do a mini reteach as well. Here's a photo of Davy Jones doing the sit cue in a pet store. A pet store is not where we initially taught sit. We taught sit at home in our living room. When I expected him to be able to do it at the pet store, I needed to do a mini reteach to generalize that cue to a new location and context. Let's go ahead and watch a video of me teaching two different dogs look at me using the stalk game. One thing I love about this game for teaching look at me is that you'll get really enthusiastic responses. You can always reduce enthusiasm. It's really hard to increase enthusiasm where it wasn't already there. So there you can see I'm reducing the response down to something a little more functional for, say, being out on a walk. And you can also reduce your hand signals for that cue down to something a little more functional. So typically what I do is I start off with both hands in the air in that funny stance, and I reduce it down to where just this kind of give five signal means look at me. So you can reduce both the dog's response and your hand signal cue for that down to something more functional. I think it's important to take a moment and discuss that teaching look at me using the stalk game is not appropriate for every dog. Some dogs have a background in which they have reasons to not trust humans. The human in this situation is putting themselves into a predatory stance for the dog. But most dogs will recognize that as a silly game. But some dogs might be genuinely frightened by this. For dogs who are more shy or fearful or who have a past with humans that isn't always positive, then you may need to come up with another context for teaching look at me. My second favorite way to teach look at me is using begging. So begging is another context where dogs will naturally give us prolonged eye contact that we can then capture and turn into a cue for look at me. Here's a video of Davy Jones begging while I'm sitting having a snack, and it would be a great moment to go ahead and capture that eye contact and teach look at me. The next style of teaching we're going to be using to show our dogs a new skill is luring. This is where we're using a resource to guide them through or into the steps. A really common example of luring might be teaching spin to a dog. Here I am teaching Davy Jones spin. So we're going to be using luring to teach touch, and I want you to do this using chopstick fingers. So you can imagine like a peace sign for your hand, and you put a piece of cheese between it. Put your hand out, lure the dog towards you. Once the dog is at your side, once their nose hits your fingers, you'll go ahead and mark and release the cheese for them. So get your lure, show your dog you have the food between your fingers, put your hand out towards them, let them start to nibble it early, that's fine, but then slowly move your hand into the natural position at your side. And as soon as their snout touches your fingers, you mark and release the cheese as a reward. So remember when we discussed a potential pitfall for capturing? Well, there's also a potential pitfall for luring, and that's that lures can become bribes. So a bribe is something that requires you to show your dog you have something in order to get the behavior you want. In order to get out of this bribery phase quickly, I want you to do the following steps. You're going to get some reps going. So you want your dog to be in a nice, easy rhythm doing the behavior over and over again. Get some reps going. And then all of a sudden, you're going to bait and switch. So you can imagine for touch, you get some reps going where they're doing touch, maybe 5, 6 reps in. Then you're going to trick your dog into following an empty hand. So you're going to pretend to put cheese in your hand. Nothing is there. Put your hand out just like you did before, lure them into position, and as soon as they sniff it, now you mark, reach into your treat pouch, and toss a treat. You will probably need to swap back into bribery mode after one bait and switch rep, and then slowly increase the bait and switch reps that you can do in succession. So now we're going to go ahead and watch a video example of me teaching 2 newfies how to do touch using this chopstick hand method. So I have a piece of cheese between my fingers there. You can see I needed to kind of lure him a little closer towards me. That's okay. Maybe add some enthusiasm using motion and momentum. And now I have nothing between my fingers, but he went for them anyway because he's used to there being cheese there. So we did a bait and switch round, went back into some bribery rounds, and then another bait and switch round. It's the same thing here. Have some cheese between my fingers. I'm luring him towards me. We get a nice, easy rhythm going with lots of successes. And then I go ahead and bait and switch. This is where I have nothing between my fingers. And I mark and follow up with a reward.